Everyone. Sorry about the slightly delayed start here, but welcome to Improving's Virtual Lunch and Learn. Before we start, I do want to call out two features for today's presentation that will make the session a little more interactive. First, make note of the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. You can use this to submit questions, which I'll deliver to our presenters at an appropriate time. But second, we do have chat enabled for today's session, so feel free to use that to talk amongst yourselves or to our presenters directly. With that said, we are excited to present two folks from Improving, Devlin Miles, our Chief Consulting Officer, and Erik Boemanns, VP of Technology, who will be sharing business case for cybersecurity. Over to you guys.
Awesome. I appreciate the intro. And Erik, thanks for joining us. So we have oftentimes waxed poetically about the need for cybersecurity and some of the struggles that business owners have. But oftentimes those are either over dinner or behind closed doors in an Improving office. And so the intent of this, as a part of our kind of continuing business case series, is to put a microphone and video camera in the middle of a room and have those conversations and really kind of dig into the details. So what we're going to be doing is looking at tearing down the jargon and the normal kind of justifications that get used, right? If you hear me use jargon or three-letter acronyms, you're going to call me out on it. I'm going to do the same for you. But without further ado, let's dive in, right? We talked often that no business can afford to ignore security, but it's a lot like buying an insurance policy. You never know if you're going to need it. You don't really know what it's going to look like. What's effective security cost? And so that's the conversation that we're trying to have today. And in that general space, I assume you've got some opinions and recommendations. So let's start with breaches, data issues, security issues. They're in the news constantly. Right. How do I know if people are able to get into my systems, and how do I stay out of the news? Like, how can I tell?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And staying out of the news, I think, is definitely a motivator for a lot of us. And just if nothing else, not having your system be breached, or what do you do if you are? One of the things that is kind of the key there is you kind of almost have to think about what if you are breached. One, how would you know? And two, let's say you know because they sent you a message saying they have your data. What do you start worrying about, right? Do you have critical client data that is super important, or your financial data, or for all those different sorts of things? You have to go through that mental exercise of, I've been breached. What am I most worried about at that moment?
That makes sense. And so is that I'd literally just go, hey, I'm going to write down the list of the most terrifying things in my company that if an outside bad actor got a hold of, and then use that as a starting point?
In a sense, yeah. What it really is, it's a inventory of your critical data, right? You're creating that inventory, what that data is, how it matters to your business. And that's a key step in kind of planning how you're going to protect it, and some of the other things that we want to talk about, if you don't have that inventory of the data, then everything else kind of is hard.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sitting here running through them, and I'm like, financial and bank data, customer data. We operate, some of our customer systems, and that terrifies me that those would be kind of out and about in the world. So let's say I've got that list now. What do I do with it?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be twofold. One, what do you do if you can't access the data? And two, what do you do if somebody says, hey, I've got your data and I'm going to release it publicly, right? Those are the two kind of common problems. A lot of times they come together, unfortunately. But honestly, if you aren't being attacked by a hacker, the first is probably more likely. An outage is routine. Every company experiences an outage at some point. And that is just as important to think about from an incident perspective as you've been attacked, a hacker has compromised your system. So those are the two exercises. How long can I live without that data versus how bad for my business is it if that data actually were to become public?
It's interesting. And so I assume we would rate those and go, these I can't operate without. These I could probably operate without for 10 or 15 days if it wasn't this date, right? Like financial systems for us, like we would probably operate as long as it wasn't month end close for a couple of
Exactly.
days.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we do this exercise, we get these pieces. That doesn't sound like a small amount of work to get there. Is this something I start tackling internally? Is this something I have to bring somebody in from the outside to do? Like what do I need to do to go about those exercises?
Yeah. So it depends on what you have internally, right? If you have a team that's familiar with these sort of things internally, you're probably fine to start there. But most companies that are on the smaller or medium size, right, probably don't have a team that specializes in cybersecurity in these sort of incidents. And so at some point, it is very helpful to be working with a partner who is familiar with those sorts of, not just, we'll get to technologies later. A lot of cybersecurity goes technology first. That's how they take your money. We want to start more just on thinking about the process and the approach that you're going to take from what do I even need to have? What do I need to process and from a product perspective? So the partner helps you navigate that. And also helps you just figure out those sort of things. Like, is this a system, like you said, month end is an important time for financial system. Payroll is an important time for it. But in those in-betweens, when are you using the systems? When are you most vulnerable? Because A, outages can occur at any time, but B, the attackers also know that, right? And so they're not going to bother your systems when you don't care about them.
That's a good point. And so I've just on this conversation, I've created this list and I've started to rank it in my head, and now I'm just terrified. And so I'm reaching for my wallet and going, what tool is going to protect me? Like, what thing can I buy to guarantee this never happens?
Right. There are no tools that you can buy to guarantee this never happens. Sorry. Unfortunately, there's nothing that's foolproof. And so that's why we don't go with that tool first approach, right? Because there are a ton of products on the market. They all do their own special thing. A lot of them overlap. So if you went out and said, what do I need to buy? And bought, let's just say you bought 7 different products to protect what you think is everything. One, you're overspending because there's a lot of overlap there. 2, you haven't prioritized those to your actual business risk and value, right? So let's say you buy a really amazing product that protects your Twitter account. Well, if the worst that can happen is a little bit of reputational damage because somebody gets in your Twitter account and says some things that they shouldn't say, is that really worth spending a fortune on? Or would it have been better to spend that money on the financial system, which would perhaps allow them to access your bank accounts or things that could cause some serious financial harm? So that kind of prioritization is a key step before you run out and buy all the things that are for sale.
Okay, that makes sense. So you mentioned the things for sale, and I've done this exercise a couple of times in the last few months of going out to AWS or Google or Azure, because we use all 3 of them, and looking at what like geo redundancy and having like full duplicates that we could swap over to and all that. And it was crazy expensive. And then on-prem, it's even more expensive.
Yeah.
Do I really need all that?
And let's figure out from a business perspective, right? So you're talking about service level agreements, right? You're talking about kind of the availability of your systems. Kind of to that first category we talked about of what happens if I can't access my data, right? And so the way we think about that, and I'll throw some of those 3 little acronyms out here now, just so we can get them out of the way. You're going to hear a lot about RPO and RTO if you're talking to vendors about your backups and your availability. What that really means, RTO, recovery time objective, that's how long it's going to take them to go from an outage to get back up to full service. So their systems crash, they have an RTO of 12 hours. That means you're down for 12 hours. You cannot use that system. RPO is the other word they like to use, recovery point objective. That's how much data it's okay to completely lose. So if the system crashes in the US East, half an hour of data may not have replicated over to US West. Is that okay? Can you live without the half hour of data that is now just vanished into the ether? Or is that a critical problem to your business? Those numbers, the bigger they are, the cheaper the solution, right? If you don't care how long it takes to recover, if you don't care how much data you can lose, then you don't need high availability at all. But the more you shrink those numbers, the more expensive it gets. So you have to decide how long can you live without the system before it starts costing some real dollars, and how much data can you lose that also means you're losing more money than you're spending.
That makes sense. So I'm kind of an old school business mindset around this. I grew up in the world of like 2 nines, 3 nines, 4 nines. Like, how many nines do I need? And what is a
For
nine?
most business, yeah, right. Percent uptime, right, becomes in the 3 to 4 9 categories, becomes the number of hours and minutes a year that system is allowed to not be available without the company that's providing it owing you some sort of service credit, basically. So if you're looking at Azure, for example, and you have a virtual machine in Azure, and they say it's 99.9% is their SLA, their service level agreement. I'm not going to do the math, but multiply the number of hours in the year times 99.9%. That's the number of hours that they will keep it alive, guaranteed. If it's down less than that, then it basically, you signed up for that level of coverage. So you ask how many you need, right? Adding that third 9 is pretty good for most businesses. Adding the fourth 9 means you effectively won't notice that it's down from a strict outage perspective. And the price, of course, gets crazy as you add those 9s, right? So it just goes up exponentially.
Okay. And so let's say, I mean, one of our systems is an employee growth and goal setting portal, right? Worst case scenario is that we can't enter or retrieve those growth goals, but we set them in 90-day windows. Like if I can't get into that system for a week, it's inconvenient, not catastrophic. So do I need to care about security if it's okay for that to go down?
You do need to care about security, right? That is still going to be something important for every system that you have. The question is how much you care about security. But also, if we're talking about purely reliability, then no, right? It is okay for that to have a week or more of recovery time. So very few outages, if you're using any of the public hosting services, last more than a few days in the worst cases in recent history. If it's an internal outage, then yeah, it could last a lot longer while you're trying to get your resources around to get it back up and running. But yeah, that system does not make sense to invest in the cost to make it redundant, to make it more reliable, resilient from a percent uptime perspective. Now, you still need backups, and that kind of comes back to the security, because you probably don't want that data to go away and have to recreate all that data.
That makes sense. So you talk about protecting data. So this is where I spend my money. Like this is where I need to put more.
Right. Backups are absolutely the most important thing, protecting that data. And so if you aren't investing in backups, a lot of the security threats that we've talked about, a lot of the incidents are going to cause a lot more harm. Ransomware is a great example, right? Ransomware gets into your system. It then encrypts all of it, and you have the option of paying a ransom, and hopefully you can decrypt it. If their software is bug-free, then you might be able to decrypt it. If they're an honest malware provider, then they'll decrypt it for you. All these sort of things are big ifs, right? Better yet, have a backup, right? And what we're seeing though in the industry is it's not just yesterday's backup, because a lot of this ransomware will sit dormant and do a little slow encryption so that 30, 60, 90 days of data could have been affected by this before you ever find out. And so not only does that backup have to be thorough, you kind of have to have a longer retention. And one other requirement is that it has to be stored basically off the network, out of band, so that the ransomware can't also corrupt your backups, because then you're stuck again. So that's kind of the key. And of course, if system outages, if a region of AWS were to get hit by a hurricane, you want your data to be backed up in a way that you can to get it back.
Okay. And so you touched on something. I want to deviate slightly from the kind of line we've been pursuing. If they're an honest criminal, is that really where the security world has gotten to? Is that we have to trust the honesty of the criminals for recovery in some cases?
So it's a two-part answer. One, no, we obviously shouldn't be to the point where we have to trust the honesty of the criminal. But two, there's some fun, I'm going to say fun stories. It wasn't fun for the customer at the time, but where they actually did get hit by ransomware for whatever reason. This was a group that I heard of, not even one that I worked with personally. They went ahead and paid the ransom, got decrypted. It all worked out great. And so 2-3 weeks later, they got hit again by the exact same ransomware. And they emailed the person. They're like, hey, we just paid you. And they're like, oh, so sorry. We have a 90-day guarantee. Here's the key again. We'll decrypt you. They have great customer service, right? That is not what you want to hope for from a criminal organization, from a group that is there to cause harm and to exploit you. And so that's where it comes back to, do you have the necessary processes and products in place, including backups, including protection of your endpoints? All the technology things that we've avoided talking about still have to be in place, because it is much better to not have this problem or to have an internal solution to the problem than to hope that they're going to honor their 90-day guarantee for you.
That makes sense. So kind of back into the line that we were talking about. So we kind of hand waved past like tools, technology. Like if I'm new business owner and I've got, $5 million business and I've got some systems and all that, like what are the check boxes that I should just make sure are there even at my size?
Yep. So there really are, I'm going to say 3 key areas. One is the systems themselves. How are you protecting them? Are they third-party systems like Office 365 with a great bunch of tools that you may or may not be taking advantage of? Are they internal systems that you need to put in firewalls, all the normal traditional security? Second is your actual end users. How are you protecting them? Are you doing security awareness training? Are you regularly working with them from a kind of almost a culture of security within your organization to make sure they are aware? And then third, because the second doesn't always work as well, how are you protecting the actual endpoints that the users are using, the laptops, the mobile phones, the things that most often are the entry point? And so the products kind of do fall into those 3 categories of initial spend and where you want to focus.
That makes sense. And so if I check all those boxes, right? I'm doing my cybersecurity awareness month stuff once a year in October, because everything's got a month now and cybersecurity awareness is October.
Exactly, tomorrow.
And I'm installing the endpoint managers and I'm turning on multi-factor, and like, is that all I need to do to be like safe and secure?
It is we'll call it the minimum threshold at this point, not the all.
Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It does start tomorrow. They have a focus this month on 4 things: strong passwords, MFA, updates, and never remember all 4 of them from the top of my head. MFA, strong passwords, updates,
people
and
training, I assume,
training,
is in there, right?
Phishing training, exactly. Yeah. Yes. That's the most important one. It's easy to skip over. And so that kind of does hit on those things again. The updates is really not just about endpoints, but is a critical area. It's also the back ends. It's also software that you develop. The phishing training, the strong passwords is really a training exercise. And then MFA, again, is more of a technical solution, but some user adoption. So those are the 4 focus areas of this year's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but they line up really well with that minimum that you have to have today to think that you're starting down a secure path.
That makes sense. So it's interesting. You mentioned the basic training. I've talked to a lot of security consultants and professionals. And something I hear often is that the wetware, right, or the meatware or the people are the weakest link in security. What does that mean?
That is, people are inherently trusting, right? And so if you get a message that is well constructed in a place that's expected, or maybe you're distracted with something else, our inclination is to actually believe it, more versus not believe it, the opposite. And so technology is great. A firewall can block a port all day long, right? If it knows that it's supposed to block that port, it will never change that behavior without a command to do so. Us humans, on the other hand, if we get an email from the AR department that says the invoice is attached, or the AP department, which as the case may be, that might make sense, right? And so the idea that I'm opening an attachment from the department of my client is a behavior that is something I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time thinking about. And so we think about a lot of the recent breaches in the news, and a lot of them are that kind of thing, like, hey, I'm from the IT department. Could you give me your password? I need to log in and fix something for you. Never do that, right? We all say that. We all know that. Never give your password to anybody, period. Not even if it's you, Devlin, here on this call. It's just a never behavior, but yet we see it happening. And so that's why, to your question, the people will always be the weakest link because of all the stuff we have going on in our lives, and kind of that we do want to trust the IT team, basically.
That's a solid point. I was actually just reminded, I was watching a video the other day. It was a 5-minute interview conversation. It started off, the very first question in the interview was like, give me an example of like a really strong password. And the person said, well, the name of your pet and like a year that's important to you or something like that. And through the conversation, they're like, well, so are you a dog person or a cat person? And literally by the end of it, had given them the years that were important to them and the names of their pets.
Exactly.
So when we say strong password, what does that actually mean? Like, I now can't use any of my pets' names and years in my password? Like,
that is true, because I'm just assuming those are on your Instagram account, right? So I can probably learn those later today. And also anything that you somewhere inadvertently share. Mother's maiden name's a great thing. It might be on Facebook, right? And so all those sort of things that we thought were secrets really aren't. There's a great cartoon too, because most websites you go to that have the 10-year ago strong password say, one uppercase, one lowercase, one number, one special character, has to be at least 8 characters. And then sometimes they put a restriction in, but it can't be more than 16 or whatever. They've actually constrained what the password can be so much that if you're trying to brute force it, you can actually eliminate more passwords because of those rules than you have to go through. Because you can eliminate all the passwords that don't fit those rules. So the actual stronger password, and you'll see a lot of the newer websites that have adopted it. Length is important, absolutely. They have to be, 8 is not probably long enough anymore. But the absolute best passwords are going to be, call it 5 completely random words that have nothing to do with each other, that were not even picked by you. You use a generator, Diceware is one that's popular, and it will hand you 5, 6 words, how many of you want. There's spaces between them, but everybody knows that, so that's not part of the secret. Because it is computationally so much harder to guess 5 words than it is to guess 8 characters, even if those 8 characters have an exclamation point in them, like everybody's strong password does. Right? That's the other problem is, what's your character? Well, for my E, it's a 3. Okay. Right? No secrets here. 5 random words picked. And what's cool about 5 random words is you can probably remember them. Unlike your super strong password that has random characters in it. So it's a shift, but it's one that I think we'll see more websites adopting that and then getting rid of those, arbitrary complexity rules that aren't actually helping.
I feel like we're going to get to the point where like strong password requirements are like, it's got to have an uppercase, it's got to have a lowercase, it's got to have a number, it's got to have a protagonist, a couple of plot twists, some good character development, and a good ending. Like, is there a point in which passwords just stop mattering in our future?
That has already happened, and now we just need for the major providers to get to that point. A lot of the new technologies, if you've ever heard of an identity provider, that's a company that is in the business of selling login services. So Okta, Auth0, Microsoft, AWS, they all play in this space. Most of these companies, I'm very familiar with the Microsoft one, but the others are working on too. They call it passwordless authentication. And so password authentication literally is that. I may have had a password at the beginning when I set up the account with them, but I no longer need to use it because it's not multi-factor. Like I'm not just looking at my phone and typing in a number in a screen. It's actually installed on the phone. So it's using my geographical location of the phone. It uses my usage patterns, my behaviors. Does Erik actually log into this website at 3 a.m.? That doesn't seem right. All these other things that are known about us as users. So they are multiple factors in that sense of the word, but they're not your traditional something I know, something I am, something I have, right? It's that heuristic above and beyond of knowing that it really probably is Erik, and it's okay to let him into that account without him ever typing any password in anywhere. So that is significantly more secure than MFA and passwords. MFA, we've already learned, is starting to become not secure. Passwords, same thing, like you said, if it's not a novel, it's not a secure password. So we do see passwordless as the near future.
So this is where I struggle in. I mean, you and I have had this conversation about improving of what's the appropriate amount of friction, what's the appropriate amount of cost. Because if we can never be 100% secure, because that doesn't exist, and the guidance we got 10 years, 5 years, 3 years ago is no longer true because of the kind of arms race that is security. How do I, as a non-technical business owner, know when I'm being sold to versus when I'm getting good advice that is in my best interest?
I think it's a hard place right now, right? Because there are a ton of security vendors on the market. Almost all of them have good products that do a legitimate thing to protect you. So the question is what they're doing so specialized and so niche that it's not a good expense at your business, right? If you're not a bank, if you're not dealing with healthcare, you may have lower inherent requirements that don't require you to go out and get that particular niche product. So I think the easiest way to think about it is start with your core systems, right? You're probably using G Suite, you're probably using Office 365 in this day and age. If you're not, that might be the first conversation is how am I managing things like email and data and files, right? So what do those systems, what do those services already offer out of the box? And do those actually meet my requirements is really the conversation that you need to be having, probably with a trusted partner if you don't have that internal capability. But does Google already give me the security I need as a business with their appropriately licensed product? Does Microsoft has all the tools that we already talked about. There are better tools for certain aspects of it, but Microsoft, for example, their suite is adequate for most businesses without ever leaving that product. So you do need that extra reason to go to that next product out, right?
Makes sense. So we've talked about protection. We've talked about what to buy, how to approach it, reliability. Now let's talk about the thing nobody wants to talk about, right? How I'm going to spend the budget after the breach rather than spending the budget to prevent it, right? Because we're probably all going to end up there at some point. What do I need to make sure happens? Like before a breach happens, what do I need to have ready so I respond well to it? I think I actually saw a LinkedIn post from you from yesterday, today, somewhere around there that talked about this. Like walk me through it. If I'm non-technical business owner, what do I need to be doing? Do I just pick up the phone and I call everybody at the company and get it going? Like, so we respond really quickly. How do we go about it?
Yes. Yeah, that was posted yesterday as well. Thank you for that. But if you do see that the core message there is once you have your plan, you have to practice it, right? So please practice your plan once you have it. But as you are kind of putting that plan together, you have to know who has a stake in the game, right? So if you have, and one of the things that's always most important is your legal counsel. If you have an outside counsel, inside counsel, always start with them because there always can be some sort of legal concerns here that you have to get worked in. So if you don't involve them early, it can just get confusing and fast. Likewise, if you have cyber insurance, they want to be brought in early so that they have a say in how you handle the response, because that can impact, their liability from the policy. So your plan has to be, who am I reaching to first? Legal and cybersecurity want to be on the first of that list. Second, then what is the team that responds? Do I have an in-house administrator? Am I a managed service provider? Do I have neither, but I have a trusted partner that I can call? Because I need to get information. I need to find out what's wrong. Why is the system having the problem, or the breach, or whatever it is that you're responding to? How do I stop it? And then how do I repair it? And so in my post, I talk about I think 1-10-60. You have 1 minute to detect, 10 minutes to identify, and 60 minutes to remediate. And that's almost never reached in most. If you read about a breach, it did not meet that pattern. And it is kind of an influence in terms of, from a business perspective, even those thresholds may not meet your own business. But yeah, if you're not detecting, we're not even having this conversation. You've detected it. Now you're responding, you're mitigating it, are really the things that you have to have that plan, know who you're going to pull in, know how you're going to triage it, know within that team, each person needs to know what they're focused on, right? So you don't have 3 people all looking at the same thing, and nobody's looking over here where it actually maybe should have been looking at. So rehearse it, practice it. There's tabletop games that you can actually buy on Amazon that will give you disaster of the day. And so pull the one and say, oh, it's not ransomware. Next one is a power outage at the data center. Whatever it is, just go through that. Be as realistic as you can, but do the exercise, walk through it, because without that practice, it will be the real incident is always going to be worse, right?
So I'm gonna loop back on something you said, because it blows me away. Was it allegory when you said that there's games on Amazon you can buy for this, or is
No.
this such a thing now that we've created a game?
It is a legitimate deck of cards. I should have brought it and had it as a prop. It is in our office here. And it is something that, again, it's hard sometimes to be as random as reality, right? But a deck of cards is close. So shuffle that thing up, pull the top one off, and figure out what you're going to do.
So would you do that something like that once a week or whatever, just to make sure you're practicing? Or
Yeah. So if you look at any sort of questionnaire on your compliance, they're asking you, are you doing it annually? That's your minimum. However, that's not going to actually cover reality, right? And so you probably want to do a full on call your devs at 3 a.m. type of thing, at least annually, so that they know it could happen. But maybe, yeah, that deck of card is a weekly thing. If you have a team that can spend some time, hey, what would we do if we're in Florida right now, right? We have real life incidents happening all the time that companies should be thinking about. And so, yeah, that's not a bad thing to do it as frequently, again, as you can afford. Weekly might be too much, but.
So you mentioned if you have a team that, has the time, and I've never experienced that. I've never been looking for more work to do. How do you make this a priority? Like, you've implemented this at Improving and at tons of clients. How do we make it a priority to actually spend the time? Because the time's real easy to come by after the breach.
For sure. Yeah, there's kind of a joke with CISOs is it's better to be the second one for an organization, because they get the budget, they get the attention, they get the resources, right? And the first one got the breach. So, so yeah, it is. How do you prioritize before it happens? I think we're starting to get past that, just industry wide, because if you haven't had a breach, you're lucky, and if you haven't, because you're lucky, your competitor has, your neighbor has. Like, it is so common now. It is so real that there's not the, well, it won't happen to me attitude anymore as common, as often, right? But every single case, right? When it does happen to that company, you see their shift in priorities. You see, there was a a famous breach a few years ago that I heard the debrief from the interim CISO, and he's like, I have an unlimited budget now. Right. So his predecessor did not have an unlimited budget. So even though we're in that cycle now, where it is starting to become that priority, I do think you have to think about assume breach is a security philosophy that I like to talk about as a way to detect and be prepared, but also assume it from a prioritization perspective. What would we be doing today if last week we had been hit by ransomware? Like, what would our spend on security? What would our prioritization of the team be as if it already happened? And you will be a whole lot more prepared for when it does eventually happen.
Okay. And so if I'm a technologist, right, or CISO, or maybe just a part of the security team somewhere, and not getting that response for budgeting, right? How do I effectively make that argument to the business? Because I've seen the doom and gloom. Security consultants come in and go, here's everything that's wrong. You're definitely getting hacked tomorrow unless you give us $1 million today. Like, it's not a trust building sale.
Right. So I think if you don't have an assessment of where you're at today, you're going to have that, right? You can't go to your CEO and say, we need to do 12 things if you don't actually know you need to do 12 things. So find a way to figure out where you're at today. Where are your weaknesses? Where do you need to strengthen it? What products do you need to add? All those sort of things. And then what would the priority be for the most bang for the buck, for the most security fastest, right? So managed EDR, enhanced detection response products for your endpoint, for your laptops, that maybe that's the first thing. That becomes part of a plan to say, here, executive team, here's what we have to do it. You've seen the news. If I have to make that argument, then we may have other problems. Here's how we're going to approach it, right? Here is, in this next 3 months, we need to purchase this product. It's going to cost this much because we have this number of users. We're going to deploy it to all of our devices. It's going to take us 3 months, and then we will, right? If you have a assessment of the weaknesses and then the plan to remediate the ones that make sense from a business perspective, again, this is where you hope your executive team is on board with the need to do something. So as long as you're bringing a well-measured plan that is not exorbitantly expensive, and that's, again, falls to the IT professional or a trusted partner to help craft that. That's going to be I think it has to be in that business terms, right? This is what it is, this is what it costs, and this is what it protects. And also, if we don't protect that, this is what that costs. Is a good little add-on.
That makes sense to me, right? From the P&L management and all that, we're assessing risks all day long, right? We're looking at opportunity costs. We're looking at cost benefit, return on investment all day. And so if I honestly look at it and go, yes to steps 1 and 2, step 3, let it happen. Like, we're not going to actively go out and try and get hacked, but if we do, the impact costs less than the cure. Seems a reasonable answer. Is it?
It's the business answer, right? That is the correct answer for the business. Is what is your risk appetite? What is your if you are okay with the bad thing happening, because the cost of it happening is less than the cost to prevent it. And yeah, it goes back to the employee recognition system that you're talking about. It's going to cost 3 times as much to run it in a way that it never goes down. Then you're not going to do it because you're not ever going to make that back, right? You're never going to avoid that. There's no way to avoid the cost that adds if you don't do it, right? So from a risk perspective, you do the math, you make the decision. Making it informed, again, comes from truly listening to the team, listening to the nuance of that risk, right? I made the thing about Twitter earlier, right? Reputation is something that some companies, that's all they have, right? They have great products, they got a team, but if they lose their reputation, it doesn't matter the rest, right? So their Twitter account may be more important to them than I alluded to earlier. And so think about all the other sort of intangible costs that can come with a breach or an incident as well when you're doing that math.
Yeah, loss of brand respect, loss of goodwill, like those.
Yep.
Those can have significant impacts, especially in today's world where even if it was a breach, you're not going to recover that by saying, hey, we were hacked, because there's going to be enough people that just believe it was the opinion. They don't go back for the follow-on story of, oh, they actually got hacked and that wasn't them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are companies at this point that do, the smaller ones that just, they go out of business, they go away when they get breached. So, or at least their CISOs did.
Yeah, if they have them,
right.
Which is becoming more and more prevalent as part of the kind of standard C-suite that you see, but CISOs are still not a 100% thing.
Right.
So I want to open up some time for questions from the folks in the attendance. I have kind of one big question while those are coming in for you. And it's, so if I'm the business person listening in on this and I go, okay, you've convinced me, what's the one big takeaway you want me to walk away from and go do something about? Because we've talked about a lot of options. We've talked about a lot of nuance. Like, what's the one big thing that you'd want everybody to walk away with?
I think it's going to be, do that assessment. Find out where you have the weak points. If you don't have the internal ability to do that assessment, find a group that can help you with that. But you have to know where you're at today so that you can make some decisions. And also, do the 4 things that Cybersecurity Awareness Month teaches us to do too.
So Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, and then do an assessment to figure out where we're at. And then from that, you can plan, you can do some things, but otherwise you're just swinging in the dark.
Exactly. You're buying things that you may not even need.
That makes sense. Well, we were so articulate and you were so amazing that even with me holding you back, we have answered all the questions. So I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you for spending 45, 50 minutes kind of talking through all of these pieces. I greatly appreciate it. I know everybody else did as well. And hopefully everybody will come back next month and join us for the next business case. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I will share, just somebody did the math for us. 99.9% is about 8.7 hours of downtime a year. So if you can live with 8 hours a year being down, 99.9 is a great uptime. So thank you for the math there. For anybody who stayed to this long, you now have that exact math. So, and again, thank you, Devlin, for having me and enjoyed it.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Have a great time and we'll catch you next time.